Hey guys, Donovan Myers back with another video on the Cerberus. The last time we took a look at installing it into a Mad Catz TE stick. Today I have the no connector version and we'll be looking at installing it into a custom stick. As I mentioned in the first video, there's a white line around the crucial parts where you can cut off most of this PCB. I'm going to be doing that to create just the smallest little PCB we can, and ironically I'll be putting it into the largest custom stick there probably is, which is my Velux panel built into a custom case. So let's take a look. So here we have the no connector version of the Cerberus. It looks pretty much identical from the top, but on the bottom you'll notice there are no connectors coming out of these points that normally would sit down into the stock Xbox 360 PCB. So we do have two ways that we can use this in a custom stick. The holes on the bottom here, you could actually, leave the PCB all one piece, and then just use the holes here to poke your connectors through for your buttons and your stick. Let them come out the top and solder them, or go through the top if you're more comfortable soldering there. You'll just want to be careful that you don't let the solder bleed between those pins there. The other method we have, as I mentioned in the beginning, is to cut along this white line, leaving only this crucial part of the PCB, and solder all of your wires to that. That's going to be a little bit more tricky because you don't have a hole to poke it through, and you have to get nice little pads of solder on each of those little contact points there. So you'll notice that there aren't any markings on the bottom to let you know what buttons each of these should go to. On the Phreak Mods website there's a handy dandy PDF that tells you all of the pinouts for each of those little pads there. So I'll link to that in the show notes so you can get directly to it, but it is on the Phreak Mods website. Here we have my custom stick ready for the Cerberus install. You can see here that I have daisy chained the grounds here for those top buttons there, and then this daisy chains around all of the buttons over here. Then each button has its own signal wire coming over, and of course I'm using a JLF harness on the bottom down there, which has the connections for up, down, left, right, and ground. All of my wires end up over here, and that's exactly where I'm going to put the Cerberus, right there like that, with the USB connection coming out, and I'm planning to just stick it in there with some double-sided tape. So before we get to all that, let's back up and look at making these daisy chains and making the wires that hook up to all the signals. So what I do is just keep all of the wire I ever come across for just this occasion. So here I have a bunch bundled up. What you need to do is just get your wire out and cut it to the length for each of your runs. Then for each connection you need one of these 0.110 female connectors. And what it's going to do is just go on the end here like this. You can see here where my pointer finger is that there are two little tabs on each side, and what's going to happen is you're going to crimp down this middle section of the collar, and that's going to crimp around the wire and get the wire in there. There's also, hopefully you can make it out, a little stopper tab kind of poking up. You can see this hole on the back is the result of that. That's how far you want to put the wire in. You don't want it coming out past that. So what you want to do is make sure your wire is stripped to the point that'll hit that little tab right there. You'll get some connection in this middle collar of the wire part, and then this very end piece here can just be the go over the sheathing on the wire. So you can see it's on pretty good there, and the little tabs right here have kind of pinched down around the wire there. Of course you could always use a multimeter to make sure. I'm just doing a continuity test here. So you can see that touching the probes to each end shows that we have a good connection. So this was a good example of a connection for just the signal wire. When it comes to the ground, because the PCB is a common ground, you want to daisy chain them all so they're all connected together. So to make a cable like this, it's very much the same process. Take a long piece of black wire, try to keep your grounds all black wire is what I would recommend, and then I'm going to use this as a model. Give yourself some slack of about 5 or 6 inches in between each one. So I'm just going to cut here. Then you want to strip each end. Put the two ends together like that and just give them a twist. Put your connector over both ends, and again run it up to where that little tab is sticking out right there, and then just crimp it together. So again, you can see the tabs are crimped down there. You can see the wires kind of poking out. I've got a nice solid connection here, and all I would need to do is put a connector on this end and just keep following that same process for my 6 or 8 buttons across the middle, and your start and select and all that. Okay, so we talked about wiring up the buttons and the joystick. The last thing we need is a USB cable. So what I have here is a really long USB cable. Obviously the flat end's going to go into the console, so we need to cut the square end off so that we can solder that to the PCB. So you can just simply cut it off. Then we need to cut back some of the shielding. Be careful that you don't cut any wires inside. Okay, there's a bunch of shielding around the wires and some extra garbage, so cut all that off. So we have the 4 wires exposed. The red is your VCC, that's the power. Black is ground, and then your green is data plus and white is data minus, so data in and out of the USB. The only thing I like to do now is put a little bit of electrical tape around this just to clean up the way that looks, and then of course we need to strip off a little bit of the ends here for the solder points. What I'm doing is just putting a nick into the wire and then pulling it off with my thumbnail. That way you don't end up accidentally cutting through the whole thing. So with our wires out of the way, now we can cut this bad boy out with the Dremel. I'm using a Dremel cutoff wheel number 409, if that helps at all. I'm also wearing eye protection. You're going to want to make sure that you don't end up getting any of this shooting in your eyes. So here we go. So take your time and go slow, obviously. I'm going to skip ahead and not record all of this. I'll be back when it's cut out. So I have most of it cut out now on all the sides. I'm going to see how much more I need to do if I can just pop it off. Pretty small. I'm going to clean all this junk up and we'll get back to it. All cleaned up. So I used some water to clean up my table, but I definitely don't recommend using water on this PCB. All I did was blow it off with some compressed air. Don't use your mouth because you'll probably blow some spit onto it or something, and then just wipe it off with a paper towel. So the first thing I want to do is wire up the USB, because I want to see if this guy is still ticking after all that. My old soldering iron is back in commission, so I like to use one that gets up to about 700 degrees and one that has a base like this that actually tells you what the temperature is and everything. These are cheap. It's about like 40 to 50 bucks for one like this, and it sure beats trying to use those sticks that you buy at Radio Shack. It allows you to get in and get out without making a big mess on everything because you're in there trying to heat up solder on stuff. So like I said, I'm going to do the USB first so I can make sure this thing still works. I've got my sheet to the left of me positioned in the exact same way, so I can see here that this is ground, data plus, data minus, and then power. So I'm going to do kind of a newbie way of soldering. What I'm going to do is lay down a little bit of solder on each of these first, then come back and heat it back up and jam the wire in. That may not be the most professional way to do it, but it's probably the easiest way to do it without getting these things crossed. So when you're working on a small thing like this, that's what I'm going to recommend if you don't have too much soldering experience like myself. I'm using 0.032 diameter, really tiny, so that way I don't get too much on there. You want to lay down a little heat onto the pad, add a little solder, So what you can see here, with the exception of the first one that's a little dodgy, the two in the middle look great because I really got the heat on there. But that's basically what you want to do, and so now I'm just going to lay in the wires and heat it back up so that they stick. So it's not the best job in the world, but you can see here that none of them are touching, so this should be a good connection. It actually works. So the last step here really is just to secure this to the stick and then solder all those wires. So I have some double-sided tape that you saw me use to solder the USB just to keep that thing in place. So I'm reusing that. Okay, so it's in position, and now I just need to solder all these. So unlike last time, I think instead what I'm going to do is tin all the ends of these wires, so that means putting some solder onto them, and then put the wire down and melt that solder to the pad. I think that's going to work out a little better for me, and it might be easier for most people too. Of course, I also have my guide with me too, so that I can make sure that I get everything connected where it's supposed to go. So I only really need to focus on this side of the board, it looks like. I'm going to start with the joystick and work my way up around the side. Alright, so I had to move it a little higher to use my existing wiring, so that's the good thing about it being so small. You can basically put it anywhere. So I'm most of the way done here, and I've completely changed up what I've told you both times. So what I'm doing is tinning the wire and putting a little pad of solder on, putting the two together, and melting them together. So I'll show what that looks like right now. Okay, so there's a little bit on here, there's a little bit on there. Put the two together. Voila. So I'm just going to go ahead and finish up. I put it off long enough. We're at the point now where I have the two daisy chains of ground here and the JLF's ground. And I need to get all three of these connected to that. Now, I think the best thing to do is to probably make like a long string of basically one ground, so that I don't have to solder all three of these big guys on here, but just one extra one on there. So what I'll do is strip back some of the longest one, we'll go with this guy, and then solder these guys to it, and then this one to that one. So now that those are all connected and I have my one wire coming out and prepared, I'm just going to add it to the USB ground here. Alright, we're good. This is pretty messy. Obviously, if I wasn't doing it for the camera, I would try to do a lot better job of routing my wires and everything. But this is ready to go, so I'm going to plug it into the PC and make sure all the buttons work. Okay, so it popped up like it should. If I go to game controller settings and then properties, I can move the stick and I get all the directions. I got 1, 2, 3 punch, 1, 2, 3 kick. I got punch 4 and kick 4, start, select, home. Everything's working. So this mod is done.